Welcome to this day in his story, a daily reminder that the Lord's hand is in every chapter of time, created by American Heritage Worldwide. Today, November 6th, we are celebrating the election of Abraham Lincoln. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now.
Today we're diving into, one of the most tense, really pivotal periods in American history. We're talking about those 4 months between Abraham Lincoln's election, that was November 1860, and his inauguration on March 4th, 1861. This wasn't, your standard peaceful handover of power. The country was literally coming apart at the seams.
Exactly. The moment Lincoln actually won that election, November 6th, 1860, the crisis just accelerated. He became the 16th president-elect, but it was a really fractured four-way contest. He did win the most popular votes and, crucially, the Electoral College majority. But that victory, it came at this enormous immediate cost.
And we know what happened next, right?
Yeah. By the time Lincoln actually took the oath of office, March 1861, 7 states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, they'd already left. They formally seceded, formed the Confederate States of America. So he was basically inheriting a nation already at war with itself even before he officially started the job.
Wow, 7 states gone before he's even sworn in. The tension, you can almost feel it. It must have been just unbearable. Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today really is to understand that incredibly dangerous journey Lincoln took just to get to Washington. And then, what did he actually say in his inaugural address? What were the arguments, the pleas he made to try and, stop everything from completely collapsing, and the human side, too.
Right. And to really get the depth of that division, you have to start with the huge gap over slavery, philosophically, legally, everything. Lincoln's position was pretty firm by then. He opposed slavery expanding into new territories. He saw it as morally wrong, though initially at least he did concede he wouldn't interfere where it already was.
But the real flashpoint was that expansion, wasn't it? The South saw any federal limit as just a direct attack on their entire way of life, their property rights.
Spot on. And you contrast Lincoln's view with his old rival, Stephen Douglas, who pushed this idea of popular sovereignty. Douglas basically argued that Congress shouldn't decide about slavery in new territories. It should be up to the people living there in each territory or state.
Which, for many anti-slavery folks, sounded like just opening the door to slavery, spreading everywhere, territory by territory, vote by vote. That legal gray area was the real powder keg.
It really was. The core question was, did the federal government actually have the constitutional power to regulate this huge moral economic issue? And the South, they weren't really looking for compromise anymore. They felt even popular sovereignty wasn't enough protection if you had a Republican government they saw as hostile. So secession became their kind of ultimate constitutional argument.
And while all this is happening, this national crisis is deepening, Lincoln has to physically get from his home in Springfield, Illinois, all the way to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration. And this wasn't just hopping on a plane. It was a train journey. It took weeks. He brought his wife, his 3 sons, his brother-in-law, other family, friends, staff.
It was very public, very symbolic trip. It drew huge crowds up north, but also, ramped up security worries significantly. He finally got into Washington on February 11th, 1861.
And that whole journey led up to Inauguration Day itself, March 4th, 1861, which sounds less like a party and more like, a military operation.
Oh, absolutely. The mood in Washington was just thick with fear, real threats of violence. The inauguration itself, held at the Capitol's East Portico, needed security like they'd never seen before. The president-elect had to have this heavily armed procession cavalry, infantry, just to get him safely to the platform. That level of military presence tells you everything about the real danger of an attack or some kind of immediate violent attempt to stop the government from functioning.
Okay, but amidst all that tension, all that political weight, there's this really human detail that stands out. This is where it gets interesting, I think. If you see photos or drawings from that day, you notice something new about Lincoln's appearance. He showed up with a beard. He was actually the first U.S. president ever to have facial hair beyond, the usual sideburns.
Seems like such a small thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially given everything else going on. But it's a really fascinating little window into maybe his personality, his connection with people.
It really is. And the story behind the beard, it's almost like folklore now, but it's documented. Apparently he grew it because an 11-year-old girl, Grace Bedell, wrote him a letter. She just straight up told him he should grow whiskers because, she thought his face looked too thin on the campaign posters and it would improve his look. Lincoln actually wrote back to her a really kind reply, though he didn't promise anything at first.
But he obviously listened. Because when he was on that long train trip towards Washington, he stopped briefly in New York and actually mentioned the letter in public. He told the crowd he'd gotten this very pretty letter from a young lady advising him to grow whiskers, and he admitted he was acting partly upon her suggestion.
Ugh.
It's like he was deliberately showing this, genuine connection to ordinary people.
And then they actually met. The meeting between Lincoln and Grace Biddle, it just provides such a stark contrast to all the political turmoil. The Philadelphia Inquirer wrote about it February 20th, 1861. They described the whole scene.
This has been quite something.
Yeah, apparently some little boy shouted out, "There she is, Mr. Lincoln," pointing Grace out in the crowd. And Lincoln, right in the middle of this incredibly high-stakes, high-security journey, he just stops everything. He gets off the train car, walks over to her, and gives her several hearty kisses. And the crowd, they said, just erupted with yells of delight. It's just this incredibly warm, specific moment of human connection right there against the backdrop of looming civil war.
It really shows that capacity for empathy he had, that connection, something he desperately need in the years ahead. But, the immediate job wasn't kissing children. He was giving a speech that could maybe, just maybe, hold the nation together.
Right. Let's shift to the inaugural address itself. This had to be the most important speech of his life up to that point. How did he possibly balance trying to reconcile with the South while also facing the fact that 7 states had already walked out?
Well, it was a masterful piece of rhetorical tightrope walking. It was considered so important the Chicago Tribune actually printed it as a special pamphlet to get it out to people. The whole tone was very deliberate, an appeal to shared history, to higher values. He talked about the mystic chords of memory and asked people to listen to the better angels of our nature, trying to lift the whole debate above the immediate politics to the sort of lasting value of the Union itself.
But the seceded states, they weren't really in the mood for poetry, were they? They wanted legal guarantees. Did he offer them anything concrete?
He did, yeah. He offered a pretty significant olive branch. He specifically promised not to interfere with slavery where it already existed in the South. He was really pleading for reconciliation, trying to take away any legal justification they might claim for leaving. His focus was laser sharp. Preserve the Union. I use that word Union something like 20 times in the speech.
20 times. But that olive branch, it came with a pretty firm warning attached, didn't it? He couldn't just let the country dissolve.
No, absolutely not. His constitutional argument was rock solid. The Union was perpetual. Secession was legally impossible, void. He stated it plainly. We cannot separate. The Union will constitutionally defend and maintain itself. That's basically an ultimatum. And while he said he wanted peace, he put the responsibility for any violence squarely on them. He said, there needs to be no bloodshed or violence, and there shall be none unless it be forced upon the national authority. So the federal government wouldn't start a fight, but it would definitely defend itself, its property, its authority.
So he gives this huge, incredibly tense speech, surrounded by soldiers, and then what? Our sources say he spent the next 10 days traveling around the country quite a bit right after the inauguration. Was that even safe? Why would he leave Washington then?
It seems counterintuitive, but it was probably a strategic move, though definitely risky. He needed to rally public support, show the presidency wasn't, hiding in fear. Estimates say something like 100,000 people lined his routes, huge crowds. It showed massive public engagement, support for the Union. It was almost like a visible demonstration of political strength right after he laid down that marker in his speech.
That makes sense. A show of strength through popular support. But those initial threats, they obviously hadn't vanished. Because when he came back to D.C., he had to sneak back in. Took a train in the middle of the night because there were still credible threats against his life. The danger was just constant.
It never really went away. And tragically, of course, this whole period kind of foreshadows his end. Even though he navigated this first massive crisis, held the Union together, he was assassinated just 4 years later, April 14th, 1865, John Wilkes Booth. Right after the war was essentially won.
Still, the legacy of that initial fight and everything he did after, it's just immense. He's remembered today as one of the greatest presidents, not just for saving the Union, but because his actions ultimately led to the end of slavery in the U.S.
And that really brings us back to this profound idea that was kind of woven through the whole conflict, something our sources touch on, the universal value of freedom. The fight Lincoln was in, yes, it was about the Constitution, about law, but underneath it all was this deep philosophical belief about human dignity.
Yeah, the sources link this struggle to fundamental scriptural ideas, the concept that God intends for us to act with our own choice, our own dignity, which leads directly to that powerful statement. Quote, "It is not right that any man should be in bondage one to another." That feels like the ethical foundation for the whole constitutional battle.
Exactly. It's where the legal meets well, the divine, you could say. And this idea of freedom, it's not just an abstract thought. It's something people make sacred promises over. Our sources bring up the example of the ancient Nephite prophet Moroni. He created this very physical symbol of dedication to liberty. He made an actual banner, the title of liberty, and wrote an oath right on it.
What did the oath say?
It read, "In memory of our God, our religion and freedom and our peace, our wives and our children," and he fastened it upon the end of a pole. That banner, that physical thing, became a rallying point for self-determination, for defending those core values. It really captures what Lincoln was trying to protect and ultimately expand during that incredibly fraught time in 1861.
That just puts an enormous weight on those first few months of his presidency, doesn't it? He wasn't just trying to enforce laws. He was fighting for this highest ideal of freedom, of human dignity, a principle that, as you said, people throughout history have rallied around.
Absolutely. Think about it. Those 4 months, Lincoln is juggling unprecedented security threats, legal chaos, intense diplomatic pressure. And at the same time, he's growing a beard on advice from a kid. He's connecting with people like Grace Bedell, and he's preparing to swear an oath to uphold a constitution that a huge part of the country was actively rejecting. It was just an incredible display of crisis leadership right from the start.
So we've looked at the immense pressure Lincoln was under in early 1861 and that universal principle of freedom that was really at the heart of it all.
Right. So thinking about everything that was on the line back then during Lincoln's inauguration and reflecting on that deep scriptural emphasis on freedom, freedom for religion, family, peace, here's a thought for you to consider. If you were writing an oath on a banner about freedom today, right now, what specific things would you commit to? What would your title of liberty say? That's maybe something worth mulling over, especially when you think about the high price that was ultimately paid to preserve that union. Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. Created by American Heritage Worldwide, may the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now.